What's good, everybody? I'm Keandre, this is HoopIntellect, and welcome back to the channel. Now, we just passed the early entrant deadline for college players, which was a sad day for the strength of this class, and we also had the combine a couple weeks ago, so we've got plenty to talk about and update in this one, especially towards the end of this board. Now, I'm still a little bit undecided between some players towards the top. We'll talk about some of those details, and also the tiers are back in this one, so hopefully that adds a little context to, where I'm at on everything. But yeah, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already, and let's go ahead and get into it. Cooper Flagg is, of course, the #1 player on the board and in a tier by himself in this class, and now that we do have the lottery set, we can expect him to be a member of the Dallas Mavericks in a few weeks. Now, you guys obviously know everything that he brings to the table at this point, but I'm very curious to see what the Mavericks do with the roster in the short term and how they approach things with AD, Kyrie's injury, and then possibly adding a little more creation to this roster. But Flagg's all-around impact and malleability should be fun to watch from the jump, and I think he's going to have a significant impact on winning right away. Now, I'm still pretty confident in having Dylan Harper as the #2 in this class. I just think he has the best combination of all-around creation, playmaking, and size outside of Cooper Flagg. Now, that's obviously not controversial, but I know some are more skeptical in him becoming a better shooter, which I think is a reasonable concern. I just personally rather bet on him improving his flaws than any of the other options. Now, the Spurs being at #2 made things a little weirder than I would have anticipated, but he's a level above the others that he'll end up being a pick there. Now, it obviously won't blow you away, but VJ Edgecombe measuring in at about 6'5" in shoes with a plus wingspan did him well in terms of retaining top draft status. I think his combination of defensive activity, athleticism, and projectable skills as a spot shooter, passer, and downhill threat make him one of the most intriguing prospects in the class. Now, I don't think he's this surefire star and think the questions about his handle and pull-up are certainly worth considering and weighing with the other options, but I think he impacts winning and his upside is as appealing as anyone after the top two. Ace Bailey remains one of the most interesting prospects we've seen in the last several years. He's a big-time shot maker at 6'8", 6'9", with great tools on defense, and that's a very easy sell. But he has some big questions in his decision-making and overall ability to create more than just tough pull-ups. Now, I do like his confidence and think it's necessary for achieving anything this competitive, but I would be a little concerned in his willingness to attack his weaknesses and play a role on a team based on some of the Combine Week comments. Now, he's 18, and that might just be his get-down. I'm also too far away from the situation to have anything more than an outside opinion, but if I'm picking him, I'd want to be certain that that confidence was backed up by the work and not the dream that he's KD or T-Mac just because those are the guys he looks up to. Now, Trey Johnson is someone that I pretty frequently convince myself of the best and worst outcomes. He's a big-time shooter with supreme confidence off the bounce and is a solid passer on top of things. And at 6'6" with a 6'10" wingspan, that's a combination that just doesn't come around often. Now, at the same time, you watch his struggles as a separator and driver and also defensively, and knowing the history of the shot-making two guards in the league, most recently watching Jalen Green struggle majorly in the first round, and a healthy level of skepticism I think is necessary, though I'll still be fairly high on him.
23, they lost. Well, they can't offensive rebound the Mays. That's true.
Kamal Malawach's ability to finish plays and protect the rim at 7'1", 7'2", keep him one of the clear most appealing prospects in the class. And though I wouldn't draft him thinking he's going to shoot it, if that does come to fruition down the line, he'll inevitably be a super valuable player. He's still very early in his basketball journey, and I think some patience will be required in him picking up things, but you can see the path to him being a high-level contributor and potentially building from there. Nakan Knueppel has become one of my favorite prospects in the class over time, and I'd be pretty surprised if he doesn't contribute at a high level. I think he's worth arguing about in terms of creation upside and how much he'll be able to hang defensively, but he does all the little things. He's effective at the bucket and on closeouts, and there's at least a chance that he could exceed expectations.
Pass, they're being aggressive early. Heads up. Flagg the lob, and Malawach.
Now, I'll be watching Derek Queen about as closely as any prospect in the class these next couple years. He has a fantastic skill set as an interior scorer, ball handler, and passer from a variety of spots. He also just has some really important concerns defensively and where he fits in best positionally. Now, Washington at #6 is the highest I would consider him just because I think that's the perfect situation for him to hit on his upside. After that, it does get interesting quicker than he's maybe discussed because of some of those fit questions, but if you can get him to bring the effort consistently and shoot it, he'll have an easier path to NBA success regardless of what else happens. Kyler Murray-Boyles remains one of the more polarizing guys in the class. Some people, like myself, think he's one of the very best defenders whose physicality as a finisher and feel as a passer make him someone that should be considered in the lottery. Others think the lack of an outside shot might be too damaging for him to contribute, which is certainly a possibility given where he's at. I just believe the other skills and production are enough to keep him fairly high, but like that same difference in opinion, I think he could land in a number of spots on draft night from about 8 or 9 on. Jeremiah Fears' ability to create advantages and make plays from there is what keeps him a lottery level prospect. He's got some big questions in his shot and some of his decision making as a young guard, but there haven't been many with his level of creativity and production as a reclass freshman. He doesn't quite have the supporting skills for me to consider him in that top 5 range, but the creation upside is there enough to keep him pretty high. Noah Isinghe has continued to produce at a great rate, having some excellent showings as of late, and still some where he's very much 18 years old and shows less than refined skills, but the defensive versatility, the play finishing, and flashes as a driver keep him super interesting. There's a lot that'll need to still come to fruition for him to hit in the way that we're hoping for, and I think that'll have more to do with his makeup than anything else, but I do think he's got far more tangible attributes, especially defensively, than the project types like Tijan Salon and Ousmane Dieng that we've seen in previous years, so he deserves interest as early as the lottery. Now this is the top few tiers. Obviously Coop is in one of his own. I also have Dylan Harper in a slight tier above the rest as well, which is a lot more arguable, but that'll be where I land. And then I'm kind of leaving it open a little bit until the final board along with the labels, just for the sake of not spending too much time on this part of things. But this is where it starts to become more of a conversation in terms of what you value, and also where fit and role start to matter a little more to me. Carter Bryant has a lot of appeal as a young wing who makes an impact defensively and has at least been capable of knocking down a 3 and playing as a cutter off the ball. Some seem a little more convinced in his ability to ascend as a creator or overall offensively in a way that I just don't, but I do think he's a worthy pick in the late lottery, and the fact that he fits on basically every team in the league does mean something. Thomas Sorber, measuring in at about 6'10" in shoes with a 7'5" wingspan, did a lot for his projection as an NBA center. He's still smaller and isn't the type of bouncy athlete that would make him a little more projectable on both ends, but I think his combination of defensive feel, finishing, and passing are worth considering as high as the lottery. Obviously teams will still be interested in if the injury will affect him at all, but I think he checks a lot of boxes for a rotation big at the least. I struggled with where to place Jace Richardson in this class. I really liked how he played this year as a sharpshooting combo guard who can make an impact in both low and high usage and also make a play on defense, but he is only about 6'1", 6'2" in shoes and hasn't shown a ton as an overall creator, specifically as a passer, and he'll also still be small enough to get targeted on defense, so he's a good enough player to make it work and possibly exceed expectations, but the margins are slim at his size. I still think there's a lot to like in Kaspers Yakuchonis' game as a bigger guard who can really pass it, play in a pick and roll, and has flashes as a shot maker. But questions about how he separates and creates advantages against NBA athletes along with the high turnover numbers, specifically off the dribble, made me slightly lower on him as the year progressed. But at a certain point, the size and playmaking and shooting upside is worth taking. Cedric Howard has been the hottest name in the draft over the last month after deciding to test the waters, and it makes a lot of sense. He's a 6'6" wing with a 7'2" wingspan that can defend multiple spots, knock down threes, and make a play as a connector. Now there's reason for skepticism because he was out all year and we didn't get to see him much past playing in the Big Sky, but I think he has too much to offer to not be considered in the top 20, especially if he can back it up in workouts. Rasheer Fleming has a pretty simple pitch as a 6'9" forward with a ridiculous 7'5" wingspan. He can cover ground defensively, guard a couple spots, and finish plays on offense. Now I'd be happily wrong if he creates in a substantial way in the league because that'd be a very fun player to watch. But even without him having that, I think if he can put the pieces together and sharpen some things on both ends, his tools should make him one of the more unique guys in the league. Noah Penda has continued to be a very intriguing prospect as a physical forward who defends in multiple spots, is a good passer, and has improved as a shooter. Now he's going to have to be better at the rim and continue to ascend as a shooter for league standards, but I think the defense is top 5 in the class and the rest is good enough to consider him within the top 20. Now, Nick Clifford is an older prospect, but you pretty much know what you're getting out of him at this point. He plays with a lot of energy, he can knock down shots, he'll defend on the wing, he's a solid connected playmaker, and is someone you can expect to fit in a lot of spots. Now, there's always a question on how much room for growth there is for 23-year-olds and how high you should take them, but I'm pretty confident in what he brings and that he will contribute in the league. Asa Newell's game is a productive play finishing forward who is frequently in the right spots and can at least move around on the perimeter defensively is still intriguing. I think he'll shoot it in the league, which should allow him to play the 4, but the more I've thought about him, he feels like a little too much of a tweener that doesn't have a ton to offer with the ball or an elite skill to be in the lottery. But after that point, I think he's got a good shot at being a contributor and should have a good amount of value because of it. Nolan Traore has had about as up and down a season as you could imagine, but he's looked better as of late, particularly as a shooter, which gives me a little more confidence in him, despite still having questions in the level of creator he is and his ability to get to and identify different spots on the floor. Someone who needs the ball as much as he does and doesn't defend at a high level is naturally going to create a wide range, but he'll still certainly have teams bought in on his talent, and especially if they value what he did before this season. Walter Clayton Jr. has the type of pull-up shooting and overall shot making to overlook what's an average game as a decision maker and passer for a smaller guard, but I think he's a better athlete than he gets credit. He competes and we've seen him perform on the biggest stage, so teams like Miami, Orlando, maybe Indiana and OKC could have strong interest in what he brings. Yegor Demon is a super impressive passer, especially for a 6'9" guy, but as I've discussed quite a bit, I worry about how he exercises more of that talent and earns lead guard responsibilities. He's a limited creator and shooter and just didn't do much at all during conference play. Now there's a point where the gamble is worth it for me, but that isn't the lottery.
Mitchell back on Yegor Demon inside to Keita, such a good...
Part of me feels like this could end up being too low for Liam McNeely considering his track record coming into the season, but I just felt like the defense and athleticism at the rim might be a little tougher to overcome even if he is a much better shooter than he showed this year. Maybe the injuries had a little more to do with his performance than we give credit, but I like him a little more in this range. Illinois' Will Riley has an intriguing game as a 6'9" wing who has shown great flashes as a shot maker and ball handler, but he is still pretty behind physically and defensively he's a work in progress. Now he is still an interesting upside play that I wouldn't be surprised to see go higher because if he hits, he could make a pretty significant impact. Danny Wolf was one of my favorite players to watch this year, and I do think his skill set as a 7-footer is unique and valuable. However, because he's not going to have the ball nearly as much in the NBA, I do wonder how easily he contributes, especially because the shot isn't elite and he's not like a wing level defender, though he can move a little bit, but he's still a fun player who has a unique game and could pop in the right role and situation. So to me, that's still something I would consider in the first round. Ben Saroff has been solid in the BBL playoffs lately, actually sweeping a EuroLeague team, and his game as a pick and roll playmaker who can pass it and live in the mid-range still has first round appeal. I'm a little more undecided on if he has enough to be a creator in the NBA, and the supporting areas are probably just fine at best. He's probably a little bit better defensively and playing off ball than maybe he's given credit, but yeah, I think he still belongs in combos with other creators here in this sort of 20s range. I thought Maxime Reynaud had one of the best combine interviews I've seen and obviously had a great day in that first scrimmage as well, which will certainly give him a bit of a boost heading into more workouts. He may not have the best defensive projection, which I think is a little more important for those role player bigs, but the offensive talent is there inside and out, and a 7-footer who can space it is going to have value until the end of time. Adou Thiero has still been dealing with that knee injury throughout the process, which isn't the best thing, but his athleticism, defensive activity, and slashing upside on the wing keep him an intriguing prospect. I have a little less confidence that he's ever going to shoot it respectably than some others, but he's a solid player, and if he does shoot it, he'll definitely be in a rotation. I'm as curious in seeing where Hugo Gonzalez ends up on draft night as almost anyone not in the lottery. He's contributed a little more consistently as of late, but for the most part he hasn't been able to show much for Real Madrid. He's got the pieces of a high energy wing who defends and can play off the ball, but questions in the shot and decision making are still there. I think he could go anywhere from like 20ish to the mid 30s, so we'll have to see how teams assess who he is and what he's done previously. Bryant has one of the easiest NBA role player pitches in the class. He's a legit 7-footer who protects the rim, can finish plays, and makes minimal mistakes. He did it consistently for years in college, and though I've mentioned some of the issues he's had against contact for a while, I think he contributes, and teams in need of help at the 5 could be interested as high as the 20s. Now, Joel Behringer's emergence as a legitimate impact player this year has been great to see. I still think he's a little more of a project than the sort of lottery consideration would warrant. However, the athletic tools and activity on defense as a late 2006 kid is super impressive no matter how you want to look at it. Now, these couple groups is about who I would consider in those last few lottery spots down into the first round. There's a few other names that we'll talk about here in a second that could be included as first round candidates, but overall we're looking at a range of potential starters, some upside plays, and contributor bets in here. Drake Powell had an impressive combine, testing as one of the best athletes in the class and measuring in at about 6'6" with a 7-foot wingspan. He's one of the best wing defenders, and though he's got a ways to go offensively, if he can at least knock down threes and play with a little more confidence, he'll have a great shot at contributing. So because his game is so malleable, I wouldn't rule out him rising a little more into that first round on draft night. Alex Tui remains a solid prospect as a guy who provides energy, an improved outside shot, and some versatility on defense. Now, you could maybe say that he's missing that elite trait that teams are looking for from a role player, but I think he does enough to warrant a second round selection, and he had himself a really nice combine showing why. I feel like the Cam Jones fan club is dwindling a bit because he was lethargic at the combine and left with an injury, but I still think he's got a nice skill set as a guard who can play on and off the ball, has improved as a passer in a significant way, and has done it consistently for a few years. And he's not a very good athlete, but he's super crafty, and I think he's still very much in that early second round range. Bogujev Markovic didn't attend the combine because his team is still playing, but he did have a solid week at the Nike Hoop Summit several weeks ago and has an intriguing skill set as a 6'11" forward who can handle it, knock down the shot, and finish on the interior. If he was a little less of a tweener defensively, I'd like him way more, but I think his skill set is definitely worth the gamble in the second. Now, not much has changed with Tyrese Proctor. He's a bigger guard who can knock down shots off the ball, connect the dots as a passer and playmaker, and get his own when it's necessary. I also like him quite a bit defensively and think he could hang his hat on that end a little more, so I think he should be one of the first several names called in the second round. I was glad Jameer Watkins decided to stay in the draft because to me he was someone that could have been picked last year. He had Tahad Pettiford in a box in the beginning of that second scrimmage and finished with 23 points and 5 steals in that one and showed a lot of what makes him someone that should be valued in the second round. Now the shot still has to get up to speed, but he has the physicality and complementary skills to be a contributor. Johni Broome was one of the most productive college players of the last several years as a high field big who can score in multiple ways and has a knack for making plays on defense. I'm more skeptical that he has the athletic gifts or elite skills to keep up in the NBA in the same way, but the statistical profile is good enough to make you reconsider some things and at least see him as a potential rotation player. I don't have too much new to say about Chaz Lanier. He proved himself as an elite shooter in the combine drills and tested a little better athletically than I would have guessed, so that was positive. I have a few more questions in his defense than anything else just based off of what he's shown the last couple years, but he's strong, he's got solid length, he's a knockdown shooter, makes a lot of sense for teams in that mid-second round range. Now, Hansen Young was probably my biggest overall winner from the combine. I always had huge questions about him going up against even good college bigs, let alone NBA ones, but he showed that he could hang physically and his skill set as a passer, scorer on the interior, and some as a shooter shine through. Now, I still think it's going to be a major adjustment for him, especially on defense, but I'd be a lot more comfortable drafting him than I was before, even when everyone was still in this class. Yannick Conan Niederhauser's tools as a rim runner and shot blocker make him one of the more appealing second round bets in the class. He's a little rough around the edges and will need to continue getting stronger, but there's certain things that he has that you just can't teach, and if he can put it together and patch up some of the positioning and screening, I think he'll be in a rotation somewhere. Another guy I think could benefit greatly from all the guys going back to college is Javon Small. He's one of the more well-rounded guards in the class despite being on the smaller side. He's physical, he can shoot it, he can play off the ball, he can make a play in the pick and roll. He carried that West Virginia team all year long. He's someone that I think deserves a little more attention than he's gotten to this point, and he'll probably get that more now. Now Kobe Bryant has become a little more appealing because he has a truly elite skill as a shooter and solid wing size minus that negative wingspan. Everything else in this game is a little more of a question mark to me, but in the right position, we've seen time and time again that it really won't matter, and having a reason to get on the floor is imperative if you're even going to have a chance to make it. I think every team could use a Sion James. He's a physical wing or off guard that defends first, can do a little of everything on offense, including knock down a three and make the right play. I consider him in the top half of the second, but if he were to last to that mid to late second round that he's been projected at times, I'd be even more excited to get him as a rotation bet. RJ Lewis decided to stay in the draft, and at this point I think it'd be tough for him not to get drafted with all the people who returned. I still like his game quite a bit as an athletic wing who brings it defensively and has improved as a shot maker, though that's still his biggest question mark. I was really impressed watching Micah Peavy this year. In fact, when I was putting together Thomas Sorber's scouting report, I was reminded by just how ridiculous he can be playing passing lanes and making plays defensively. Now, he'd have to continue shooting it like he did at Providence, and he is pretty old, but I like him as an energy wing who defends first and can make a play on both ends. Now these are some of my favorite second round plays in this class. There's a few others who could also end up in this next tier as we mentioned earlier, and a split might be necessary somewhere, but they all at least have a very good skill or two and good physical tools to be in the mix for guaranteed deals and could exceed expectations. And around this point is where I think the talent pool starts to hit a pretty steep decline. Kentucky's Amari Williams didn't get the call up from the G League Elite camp, but he's still someone I'd heavily consider in the draft. He's a 7-footer who can operate as a hub, finish plays at the bucket, and give you something protecting the rim and on the glass. He is older, but I see a big that should be on an NBA roster in some capacity, and in a class like this, I'd be pretty happy to get him if he does end up going undrafted. I was pretty high on Rocco Zikarsky coming into the year, but the injuries and lack of impact in year 2 of the NBL made me a lot more skeptical of him. But you can't teach 7'4" and the highs of his rim protection that we have seen, so he'll be worth a shot if he does end up staying in this draft. Now, John Tonje was one of the weirder breakout players this year. He didn't contribute much during his career at Colorado State and had that 1 year at Missouri, but he had a big time season for Wisconsin as a 6-year senior, and his shot making and physical downhill game make him a draftable player here in the second round. Hunter Salas has some good moments in those combine scrimmages, and his game as a shot-making 2-guard who can get his own off the bounce and has a solid wingspan to defend is still worth considering in this class. Sure, he's a little slim, he's not a great playmaker, but there's enough there to at least garner two-way interest. Eric Dixon became one of the most prolific scorers in college basketball as a senior for Villanova. He's another guy who's pretty old and a bit of an interesting NBA fit, but that golden size, agility, and productivity is an easy sell this late in the draft. Now, he's another guy who's old and I think will get picked on a little bit defensively, but it's easy to buy him in a play finishing and screener role, at least as a third big or a depth piece. Another guy who really stood out to me at the combine was Gonzaga's Ryan Nembhard. Now, he's 6 foot, he hasn't had the most convincing shooting or scoring career, but that man knows how to play basketball, and you could guarantee his scrimmage team was going to be firing on all cylinders, and sometimes it's not as complicated as we can make it. Sure, there's stuff that'll probably hold him back in the NBA, but the dude can hoop, he can make plays at a high level, and at this point, that's all you're looking for. Lakeland Olbridge also made a great impression in the process. He's an energetic forward who finishes well, and the flashes of fluidity and ball skills he showed in the NBL were there too, so he's certainly in the mix for a two-way. Now, Dink Pate had quite a bit of promise heading into the Ignite and then this year with Mexico City, but he just hasn't put it together in a meaningful way. I'm still intrigued by him, I guess, as a wing with ball skills, but the shot looks rough and I'm not sure where his niche would be at, and you gotta have at least one to earn that investment. Kobe Sanders is someone who has greatly benefited from the pre-draft process, starting out in Portsmouth and then getting called up to the NBA Draft Combine, though he ended up having an injury there. But the amount of returners made his chances of getting drafted a lot higher too. He's a big wing playmaker at about 6'8" who can get his own off the bounce, and had a really good season at Nevada this year after playing at Cal Poly for most of his career. Missouri's Scoop Bates has had himself a really good process. He showed out at Portsmouth and then worked his way through the elite camp up to the combine. He has a long track record going back to IMG and even before that of being a nice complimentary guard who plays efficient basketball, defends and takes care of the ball, and he showed that he belonged in those scrimmages in a way that I think really helped him secure a two-way opportunity. Max Schulga didn't stand out too much to me at the combine, but his track record as an excellent shooter who can make a play is appealing. Now, he's not there as an athlete, and that's probably the biggest issue to me, but I think he does enough to be considered at this point. Florida's Elijah Martin is a bit of an unconventional player. He's an undersized off guard, but he has long arms, he defends, he makes winning plays, and has developed into enough of a shot maker to have a chance. I wouldn't have considered him much as a draft pick prior to the returnees, but he's a lot more interesting now and had a major impact on a national title team. And then here is a look at this last tier. These would have been mostly undrafted two-way candidates had we had more people stay in this draft, but they've gotten a slight bump and will have a better shot at getting their name called now. Obviously they're towards the end of the board for a reason, but all of them and a handful outside of the 60 have enough there to be on an NBA roster, at least in the short term. Now this is seemingly what an NIL era group looks like outside of the top 60, and there's just not a lot of guys I think are worth investing in, so we'll probably get a handful of G League players from the last couple years, maybe a couple international guys that will get two-way opportunities that wouldn't have otherwise. But some of the notable names that return to college that we didn't mention, or you might be wondering where they were at on this board, we've got Yaxel Lindeborg, Tahad Pettiford, Alex Condon, Miles Bird, Milos Uzan, Carter Knox, Boogie Flynn, Darion Williams, Isaiah Evans, Nate Biddle, and Otega Owe. I'd anticipate we hear something from a few international prospects here soon too, so that could shift some things as well. One of those international players is Neo Abdullah. He's been rumored to be a candidate to go to Virginia Tech or Kansas next year, but if he does end up staying in the draft, he'll be intriguing enough to be considered in that early to mid-second type of range to me. Michael Ruzic is another who will be on the board if he does ultimately declare, but unless he got a stash situation that he really liked, it might make sense to delay that for another year. Now there are a few interesting players towards the top of the list and a couple deep shots in there, but this is the group that teams will be choosing from for a couple two-way and mostly E10 and summer league type of opportunities. I appreciate y'all for watching this one and definitely for rocking with the channel during draft season. A mock draft doing 50K is absolutely insane, so I always gotta say thank you for rocking with me all this time. We've got plenty more scouting reports on the way, so stay locked for all that. But yeah, that's all I've got for this one. Oh, obviously be sure to leave a like if you enjoy, subscribe if you are new to the channel, and leave a comment down below of maybe the most unexpected or random name you think could be drafted in the second round. As always, I'm Keandre, this is HoopIntellect. Until next time, I'm out.